Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement live stream broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. My name is Larry Taylor, and I'm here with my co-host, Betsy Cunningham. If you would like to ask questions, you're welcome to do so in the chat area on YouTube. And Betsy will relay your questions to us, and we will do our best to answer them. On our show today, we're going to talk about the 2-year anniversary of the Multnomah PCP stuffing event. And then we're going to talk about what happened at the last weekend's Democratic Party State Central Committee meeting. This was the last one of the 2-year biennium. And then we will talk about what we accomplished in the past 2 years in the Democratic Party of Oregon, so you can see how your $1 million was spent. And then we're going to talk about upcoming events. So first up, I have joining me is Bonnie McKinley, who was one of the activists who organized a stand-in at the party. So on Saturday night, on December 1st, they had a sort of small-scale fundraiser for the Multnomah County Democrats and the Democratic Party of Oregon. It's actually a pretty amazing because of who shows up there. And for the last couple of years, the climate protesters have been protesting. Welcome, Bonnie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we have some shots that we'll show of the. Oh, first of all, I have to talk about the 2-year anniversary of the PCP recruitment in Multnomah County, and then we'll get to the State Central Committee. So what happened 2 years ago was the beginning of the campaign to elect the officers of the Democratic Party of Oregon, and what was unusual about the December election was that there were 109 PCPs appointed that month on December 28th, which is between Christmas and New Year's. It was a very unusual appointment because there was no screenings. Just someone walked in with a stack of 109 people to be appointed. What was interesting is about who was on the list. Thomas Wheatley, who was Governor Brown's campaign manager. Rachel Barnett was on it, who at that time was the DPO deputy director. Lisa DeZono was on the list. She's a major donor who would eventually become appointed chair of the Rules Committee. Molly McGuire, who was on Senator Merkley's staff. Candy Smith, who was on the DPO staff. Her fiance was on the list. And then Jefferson Smith, son of Meredith Wood Smith, the former DPO chair, was also on there. And those are just some of the names that I could recognize out of the 109 people that had been recruited. And the reason why these were important, because these 109 appointees were then eligible to vote for the State Central Committee delegates from Multnomah County, who then would vote for the officers at the Democratic Party organization in the following March. On the next slide, you can show what the PCP appointments look like. So to put this in scale, back when I was chair of Multnomah County about 2 decades ago, there were about maybe 250 PCPs in total, and what they appointed that night was 109. And this is a graph showing the appointments leading up to the December. So there were none in June, none in July. There were like 6 in August. There were none in September. There were 20 in October. There were 15 in November. And then we get this slew of 109 appointments that were unscreened and appointed to Multnomah County Central Committee. Ordinarily, we welcome PCPs with open arms. But then at the next slide shows what happens at the reorganization. So some of those people ended up running for State Central Committee slots. And of those, Loretta Smith, Elisa DeZono, and Mary Nolan were elected as State Central Committee members. We don't usually get county commissioners running for these positions. These are usually held by grassroots people. And certainly it was unusual for Mary Nolan, who was a former House Speaker, to be elected. And then under the alternate delegates, and really what differentiates the delegates from the alternate delegates is that they just got fewer votes, and so they filled up the alternate slots. They included Meredith Wood Smith, former chair of the DPO, Barbara Smith Warner, who was an Oregon House representative, Molly McGuire, Merkley staff, and then Tim Leahy, who was from the Wyden campaign. Again, it's highly unusual for PCPs who just show up to get elected for state central committee seats because they're highly sought after. 5 of the 7 were elected to these. And then these people eventually voted for the DPO officers in the March 2017 reorganization. And the chair of the DPO won by switching 9 seats. She only won by 17 votes. So you can see where every vote counted. And they would have done much better at the State Central Committee if we ourselves hadn't mobilized PCPs to attend. Multnomah County actually reflected the base, which we know 56% of the Democrats in Oregon are progressive, and so that's how we maintained our numbers there. So I just thought I would share that with you, what happened behind the curtains, because everyone was wondering how the chair of the Democratic Party got elected when she had never attended a state central committee meeting before then. On to the holiday party. So again, I have with us today Bonnie McKinley, who organized protesters for the event. Again, welcome, Bonnie. Tell us about your organization and what you were doing that night.
Okay, so I guess we call it more of a presence than a protest for this particular event. Not that we're shy away from protests, but I'm with a group called Stop Frack Gas PDX in Portland and the Climate Action Coalition, and a number of individuals who are also concerned about climate issues, particularly at this time, fracked gas projects in the Pacific Northwest. Our elected officials and appointed officials are designated to work for us, the people, and we always think it's very important to communicate with them our climate concerns and our demands for immediate action on climate. And we do this through emails, postcards, many calls, attending town halls, and public hearings. Just in 2015, we were at another Democratic holiday gala that the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers hosted, and we were outside there. This time we got to be right by the front door. We were very pleased. We thought we'd be exclusively on the sidewalk, but we were welcomed almost, I would say, 85% of the passers-by, and we were right by the doorway of the entrance to the Democratic Party of Oregon's holiday gala. Welcomed us, thanked us for being there. We were very pleased. We had a number of messages. We did have projections on the building calling for a just transition and through action on climate. So we had those projections that greeted people as they came to attend the gala. But we had signs as well. We had a giant banner with a quote we really appreciate from our governor, which is, "Future generations will judge us not on the fact of global climate change, but on what we do to tackle it." And we take that to heart, and we know Governor Brown does. I've heard and seen video of her saying it a number of times. We're particularly concerned that ultimately she takes a stand on the Jordan Cove fracked gas terminal and the Pacific Connector pipeline. We don't think they're good for Oregon, our region, the planet, our climate. Other messages we wanted to convey were that we wanted people to learn about climate breakdown and support a Green New Deal. Also, we were leafleting for forest protection, and also that elected officials take the pledge. If people are not familiar with the pledge is, and I'll quote, "I pledge not to take contributions from the oil, gas, and coal industry, and instead prioritize the health of our families, climate, and democracy over fossil fuel industry profits. If people would like to see that, they can go to nofossilfuelmoney.org. Again, nofossilfuelmoney.org. On their website, it says, taking the pledge means that a politician or candidate's campaign will adopt a policy to not knowingly accept any contributions over $200 from the PACs, executives, or front groups of fossil fuel companies whose primary business is the extraction, processing, distribution, or sale of oil, gas, or coal. And they will provide a list of the companies upon request. Some of the groups behind the pledge are Public Citizen, Greenpeace, 350 Action, Oil Change US, Friends of the Earth, and many others. So, we're, as I say, mostly concerned about acting on climate breakdown. And for us, that includes ending dependence on fossil fuels as our main energy source, building no new fossil fuel infrastructure, and there are a number of such proposals in the Pacific Northwest. We also want to see an implementation of swift and fair, just transition to safe and reliable renewables, promoting energy efficiency and conservation, swapping government subsidies from the fossil fuel industry to clean energy development. Our fossil fuel companies are among the richest in the world. As Bill McKibben likes to say, Exxon has made more money than the invention of money. Currently, the U.S. government gives subsidies to these very fat and planet-destructive companies, the fossil fuel industries, to the tune of $20 billion a year in subsidies for development of their projects, where we really feel that money should be going to safe, clean, green energy. We're also concerned with, excuse me.
Oh, so so if we go to slide 15, you can see who got your message. And as I was saying earlier, one of the great things about Oregon is that you can actually, for a very reasonable price, attend an event where you have access to people that you ordinarily wouldn't see. And so what you see in this picture is Governor Kate Brown speaking. And then in that front table on the right is Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley. Next to him was Joe Smith and Jefferson Smith. In the center there in front of Kate was Jamie McLeod Skinner, who was the representative who ran for Walden's seat in CD2. The woman on the left is Mary Nolan. There were no actual representatives at the meeting because usually they attend, but there were a smattering of Oregon elected officials as well. So the great thing is that you can mingle with these people and talk to them and have a personal conversation with them, which is quite different than you usually get to interact with these people. So some powerful people get to hear your message, Bonnie.
Yeah. That's very true. We had two people in, and they did get to talk to Governor Brown and Senators Wyden and Merkley and share their message. They were particularly impressed with Jamie McLeod Skinner, and they had a lot of hope that she would be going far. They found her extremely intelligent, dazzling, and extremely charismatic. So she was left quite a mark on our two people who were on the inside. And the people on the inside actually had some clothing that had a few of our slogans on them as well. So we covered the scene inside and out.
So let's show slide 16, and you can talk about the hearing that's coming up on December 13th.
Sure. Just 38 miles from Portland and less than 50 miles from Astoria is the proposed fracked gas to methanol refinery in Kalama, Washington, right across the river. And this coming Thursday, December 13th, there will be a public hearing held in Longview at the Cowlitz County Event Center at 1900 7th Avenue, right in Longview. There'll be an indoor rally at 5. The hearing will be from 6 to 9. As I said, this is the world's largest proposed methanol refinery. The company that wants to build it is an arm of the Chinese Academy of Science, and the company is Northwest Innovation Works. It had plans to build a similar plant in Tacoma, but the people kicked it out, and they went to Tacoma, where there was less people, and currently, and a certain amount of, they hoped less opposition, but the people are up in arms against it. And we are afraid if this refinery does go through, Northwest Innovation Works currently holds an active lease right in Clatskanie, Port Westward, to build as what they say is a twin sister to this Kalama refinery. And it won't be good for the climate. It won't be good for the river, the people of Kalama and the Pacific Northwest. So people can attend this hearing and wear red, whether you intend to testify or not. There are talking points available through Columbia Riverkeeper if you want to go to their website.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can go to that and attend and sign up and speak and oppose it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Be there or learn. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie, and hope to see you next year at the Christmas party.
We will be here.
So that was the Christmas party. So the next morning, we started off at 8:30 with the Rules Committee meeting, and I have joining me today James Barber, who's a fellow member of the DPO Rules Committee. The Rules Committee meetings are always the hottest ticket of the weekend. It's amazing how much attention we get. We always have a professional parliamentarian, and usually the DPO executive director attends, and we get members of the DPO committee. This time we had Valdez Bravo, vice chair, and Travis Nelson, who's one of the DNC members attending. He's also an alternate delegate to the committee. And everyone shows up. So 18 of the 19 delegates were in attendance, plus most of the alternate delegates, and then various other observers. The room was packed. So the business of the committee that day was approving gender-related changes to the bylaws. We approved a template for caucus bylaws. We have caucuses that get formed, and they have to submit a set of bylaws, but this is not a skill set that most people have. And so what we're doing is providing them with a template so they can get most of the things accurate, and then change anything that's specific to what they're trying to do. We adopted Standing Rule 13 on undocumented processes from the subcommittee that was chaired by the Rules Committee Vice Chair Rochelle Dixon, with a recommendation to approve. This was something that we had been working on for 18 months, and we're going to be talking about that in depth in the coming slides. And then there was a motion to table establishing rules for the Grassroots Leadership Institute. This was something that I felt was important, and we're going to also talk about a little bit later. And it gives you some insight into how much of a governing body the State Central Committee actually is. The next slide talks about what it is, and the Grassroots Leadership Institute was something that showed up on the DPO website a couple of weeks ago. No one had ever heard about this talked about, and so everyone was, not everyone, but a number of people were wondering what it was. On Saturday night at the gala, they collected somewhere around $60,000 to fund it, and so there was some concern about an institute because we've had experience with Emerge, which is the training program for females to run for office. We've had DPO officers sit on their interview committees and actually eliminate candidates because who they supported in the primary in 2016. And we didn't want that kind of thing happening again. And so that's why a motion was made to write rules for this. We were told that this isn't really an institute, it's an umbrella term for existing programs. So it's apparently nothing new, but just a way to raise more money for the existing budget. Although there were different things talked about there, some comments were made about, well, the institute really needs to be left to Jefferson Smith and Joe Smith to define, which doesn't make any sense because they're really not part of the Democratic Party of Oregon structure, and you don't have people coming in from the outside just by donating a bunch of money, establishing programs within the party without it first being at least run through the central committee, or in terms of an interim business, the executive committee. So those were tabled, possibly to come up again later. So the next slide talks about how major programs are usually created. So organizations usually have annual planning sessions, and they identify a problem, and then they figure out what a solution would be to address the problem, and a budget is created which yields what your fundraising goal is, and then the program is approved by somebody, and then the operating rules are written, and then that's when fundraising commences. But the DPO sort of inverted this whole thing, and they're raising money for something that has yet to be defined. Little shocking. I come from managing nonprofits, and I've never seen anything like this done on a scale before. But this is a message to all of you members of the State Central Committee. You are the governing body, and this is going on, and you are ultimately responsible for this. James, did you have anything to add about the Rules Committee meeting?
Not about that stuff in particular. I had missed that showing up on the DPO website, and I had no idea what that even was about because I missed the holiday party the night before where they talked about that. So, but the Rules Committee, always fun.
So then in the afternoon at 1:15, we started with the State Central Committee itself. This is the governing body of the Democratic Party of Oregon. There's a slide showing what the meeting looks like. This is probably the most unappealing slide you can imagine to get someone to attend a meeting. Then the center is Valdez Bravo, the vice chair, speaking. And then we have all of the officers of the party sitting in the front of the room. I was sitting towards the front, so you don't see the approximately 120 people that were sitting behind me. The event itself, there's always a bunch of reports at the beginning. One of the first ones is the Credentials Committee. We had 98 of 135 State Central Committee delegates who come from counties in attendance. And so this was 72% of them. Unfortunately, what was predominantly represented was the west side of the state, because this was a meeting held at the beginning of December. And so a lot of the counties that have 2 and 3 delegates to the State Central Committee were not able to make it. So the attendees disproportionately represented the west side of the state. And again, it was unfortunate because it's really the east side of the state where we need to increase our support. All of the officers were there, all the CD chairs were there, and most of the caucus chairs. There was one unfortunate incident in that a veteran was denied delegate status, even though he was the first delegate in line, alternate delegate in line from Washington County. That's something we have to work on. But the good news is, one of the things we'd worked on this time was making sure that everyone could attend, even if they showed up late. And so the credentialing chair was, or the credentialing table was open the entire time. Next slide, please. So again, the three pieces of business were the gender equity rules that we passed, and then Standing Rule 11, which was on rules for electronic meetings, and then Standing Rule 13, which was about the undocumented processes. The Standing Rule 11 was really important because we currently don't have any rules governing electronic meetings, and there's not a lot in the bylaws that that speak to it. And though we've had big issues in the past with everyone being put on mute, which of course is strictly forbidden under parliamentary procedure. And so what we had been developing is a set of rules so that people's rights in participating in these meetings were protected. There were two people that testified against them. The first one was someone who was a chair, and she felt that these rules were too cumbersome for her to administer because she likes putting everyone on mute. But like I said, she can't do that anyway if she's following proper parliamentary procedure. The other comment was interesting because they were complaining about us not accommodating hearing impaired participants. But we were in a meeting where even if someone was hearing impaired at the State Central Committee, there was no ASL sign language people translating or anything, so they couldn't even participate in the meeting we were sitting in. So yes, we hadn't provided for ASL, and so then we had a DNC member jump up and say, you have to listen to this person and his concerns, and turned it into an emotional argument. And then there was an immediate motion made to refer it back to the committee, and so that's what happened to Standing Rule 11. Next slide. So if you are in a committee meeting in the next couple of months, because this will not come up again at the earliest until for 6 months, we are having another show today at 12:30, and we're going to be talking about what you can do to protect your rights inside of a electronic meeting if you find yourself in one, and some examples of motions you can make on how to get your rights back. And then we went to Standing Rule 13.
Can I add something there?
Yeah.
That was really disappointing to see that rule get sent back to committee, because we had worked on that for a long time. How long did we work on that? A year and a half?
Yeah, that was also in the hopper for a year and a half.
I mean, it came about because of the electronic meeting that was held 2 years ago at the State Central Committee, where people were muted by the host of the meeting, right? And they were unable to speak. They couldn't interject. They couldn't object. None of the rules of Robert's orders were followed. Credentialing wasn't followed. And that was when these electronic meeting rules proposal came about, was after that, and in response to that. So we find ourselves in another position like this. If there's an ice storm before the next SCC meeting, like last time, we could end up operating with no electronic meeting rules again. So the objections that were put up, they're not addressed, right? People that have disabilities can't attend anyways. People that live in rural areas and the internet's not good enough for them to attend electronic meetings, those are still going to be a problem. And it was twisted around as if these rules can somehow address that, which they can't. They weren't intended to implement any new software or requirements. It was just to empower the people that attend the meetings that we already are having. And so big disappointment. Hopefully we'll get those passed. Whatever. I mean, if we need to make some changes, great. But I don't think that going back to committee, we're going to be able to address any of those changes that they made, because these rules weren't intended to address those changes.
I'm going to interrupt. Bram Sly one asked, so what is needed to be done to resolve this?
Well, I'll say, in my opinion, I think that people need to realize that we are already operating. We're having electronic meetings, and they're operating without any rules right now. So we need to realize that there should be some rules in place to protect the members' rights of the people who should be at those meetings. So whatever we need to do to empower the members of those committees.
And somehow we need to get leadership behind this, or elect leadership that is supportive of the work of the committees. I don't know about you, James, but I really didn't feel supported in this at all. And when we go through the review of the accomplishments of the last 2 years, you'll see that not a lot really got done.
Can I ask, how are you going to address the disability rights issue? I think that is a critical issue that may even be a legal issue for the party not to address.
It was a very good point, and we should start by getting translators at the State Central Committee meeting. You know, there's a cost involved, but it's really not that much. And what was really interesting this past year was when a deaf candidate ran for Portland City Council. He showed up with a ASL translator, and suddenly a whole group of hearing impaired residents of Portland started attending the campaign meetings. And so it would be really great if that would happen. And then if the Disability Caucus would also reach out and communicate to people that they're actually welcome and that ASL services will be provided. Then, you know, if we use a tool like Zoom, then people can actually visually see an ASL translator translating what was being said. So that would be a good one way to solve that problem.
Thank you. I just want to jump in and say, one great way to fix the problem is to utilize the technology that they agreed to utilize in the platform under engage. I mean, like implementing these rules will help solve the problem. It's kind of a, loop there. And just a greater problem with the SCC. Please, two of you tell me if this is right as we go into Standing Rule 13. Do they not understand that when something is sent to committee, it's supposed to come back with the understanding that it was debated, that you guys worked out a lot of this stuff? And it seems like when the SCC gets like, what a surprise, like the committee's deliberation doesn't seem to matter, right? That seems to be an overall attitude there. I don't know. That's just my view. You guys?
Yeah, I think we tend to see some emotional arguments that are designed to pull particular strings and get people to vote certain ways. It's not just the Republicans that operate with fear-based tactics. I think it happens in the Democratic Party as well. And, anytime there's contention, people tend to sit out or not make proposed changes because of fear that somehow the proposed change may be instituted forever and it will never be able to be fixed. I think that's kind of the reason why we saw this and the next one, the next proposal lose, is because the arguments seem to think that if we implement this, we're stuck with it forever, and we're not going to be able to fix it if problems actually arise.
So the next slide is on Standing Rule 13. And so what we'll do is give an overview of what happened and then talk about the specifics, because it should be, for some of you, it would be interesting to know how this actually took 18 months to gestate. So after 18 months of work on Standing Rule 13, which was a way to bring undocumented processes before the Assembly so they can actually weigh in on them, and this is empowering the Assembly to do what they are chartered to do in the bylaws, which is be the governing body of the State Central Committee. We completed our work on October 7th, and then no one in the rules leadership acted and called the meeting to do anything on it. And so the November 11th deadline was missed for submitting things to the State Central Committee. And what that resulted in was, first of all, no distribution of material on a very complex issue. It required a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules to even talk about this in the meeting itself, which caused a lot of frustration within the Central Committee because there was a lack of forewarning, and they were sort of broadside with that. And ultimately what happened was that the State Central Committee referred this back to the Rules Committee for a number of reasons. And so, John, can we display the detailed version of the timeline, and we can talk about how this started out and ended up where it was? What John has done is he's plotted out the events of this on a timeline, so we can walk through the events. So starting out in the June 25th State Central Committee meeting, there was a motion made that all undocumented processes be voided, and that any new processes would be documented and reviewed by the State Central Committee. That was then referred to the Rules Committee for refinement and review. In the July, so then there were a series of meetings where we considered stuff, but this one was not ever brought forth. We kept having to drag this back and putting it in front of the committee. John, if we could just focus on the
Larry,
slides.
I dropped the link to this because it's a pub. Everybody, the link to this slide deck is in the description, and you should pull it up in a screen, Larry, because you're not going to be able to read this from my image here. There's no way. There's a lot of tiny text in here. You know, I see you squinting to try to read it from my display. So I pulled the link up from Slack, and I'll show it.
So on July 18th, there was a Rules Committee meeting, but there was no action on the undocumented processes. On July 25th, there was another meeting. We discussed SCC terms, delegates terms. There was no action on the undocumented processes. On August 6th, there was another Rules Committee meeting. This was at the Q3 meeting where everyone got together. We discussed undocumented processes. And then on September 17th, we had another meeting, and that's where we actually discussed the electronic meeting rules, and we discussed the undocumented processes. And it was decided that Chris and James would create a survey to understand what the undocumented processes were that were out there. And so that was kicked off on September 17th and was left open until just a few weeks ago. And during that entire time, 4 undocumented processes had been collected. And so the argument that the admin committee would be overwhelmed with work was ended up not being valid because only 4 had been brought up. And the real intention of this was only to focus on the processes that embarrassed the Democratic Party of Oregon because they go against our sensibilities in terms of fairness and equality. On October 1st, there was a special meeting where we talked about the electronic rules. Voted on a bunch of other stuff, including bylaws for some committees. Then on October 11th in 2017, we talked about undocumented processes. And we had the first draft of the actual rules that was submitted by somebody. So Jeremy Likens actually took the initiative to translate all of the talk into something. And then we had the November 8th special meeting. Nothing happened there. We had the November 19th meeting in Portland. We talked about replacement provisions for delegates.
Keep in mind, everybody, that's 2017 we just cleared. All right?
Yes. And then we get into 2018. We had another special meeting on January 16th. We talked about the platform convention because we actually did have some major things coming up. So we talked about the platform convention, which was coming up in March. At the February 7th meeting, we passed the platform convention rules. March 17th was the actual weekend of the platform convention, and there was a State Central Committee meeting, but it was an abbreviated one, so there was no work done there. On the June 10th meeting, we approved the Young Democrats bylaws and the Native American Caucus bylaws. nothing on rules 11 and 13. And then we had the former chair, Eliza Dozono, resign, and Chris was promoted. And that happened and it was announced on July 25th. Then at the beginning of July, I had sent 2 messages to the new chair of the Rules Committee, requesting an electronic meeting because we were getting to the point where we were running out of time to deal with these. I received no response from him, and so I then contacted the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon, and I said, hey, is Chris on vacation or something? Because I requested a meeting and I didn't receive any response. I'm a delegate, and a common courtesy to delegates would be at least to acknowledge that you got a message, but that didn't happen. After I contacted Gene, then we got a response from Chris that he had received the messages, but still no meeting was scheduled. So there was a majority in the Rules Committee that wanted to proceed, and so we scheduled our own meeting. We had 6 members who wanted to meet, and so we conducted that meeting at the end of July, where we then considered the rules and the electronic meeting rules and got those passed. We caused great consternation. We were told that we couldn't do that, and this is part of the whole control issue within the Democratic Party of Oregon, that only a chair can call a meeting, and if a chair doesn't call a meeting, then you can't meet, which I got testimony from 2 professional parliamentarians which refuted that. If you have a chair that doesn't call meetings, any 2 members can call a meeting and make progress. Then we finally get to August 6th, where we discussed this was the beginning of the whole non-binary gender equality discussion, which then took precedence over everything else that we were discussing.
So was that, just to clarify, because Chris Wigg, the chair of the Rules Committee, called for a meeting finally for a meeting to happen on August 6th, and the meeting that you had on August 6th, after you guys had requested one and been denied your own meeting, didn't discuss the issues you wanted to discuss. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, because for some reason the gender issues were hot, and so being nice people, we were accommodating to the request of the chair, and we deferred to him and continued on. Chris then sent the proposed rules that Jeremy had written to the...
Hang on. I just want to read something here. In your notes, it says, on August 6th, the accepted outcome of July 30th, 2018 meeting. So was the July 30th meeting the meeting that the 6 of you had? Because it seems like what happened is you guys made some stuff on the 30th, and then on this meeting on August 6th, the Rules Committee approved that stuff. Is that what I'm reading?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And it wasn't 6; it was a majority of the Rules Committee. So there were 10 people in attendance, and we, because we didn't have the regular chair, we appointed a pro tem chair and a pro tem secretary and took minutes, and then we presented those minutes at the next meeting, and they were accepted. So even though they claimed that we couldn't call a meeting, they tacitly accepted the results of the meeting, and that's how we were able to make progress.
So your illegitimate meeting resulted in legitimate rules being passed by the membership, and this is after the chair of the Rules Committee refused to call a meeting. Thank you.
Yes.
I just want to clarify.
So then the output of that was sent to the admin committee by the chair of the Rules Committee for feedback, and that's where we get this 4-page response from the admin committee with all their concerns about what had been written inside the rules. And so what we decided on September 16th was to create a subcommittee to take the feedback from the admin committee and incorporate that into the rules, which is what we did with Vice Chair Rochelle Dixon. So we met and we simplified the language, which ended up causing a problem when we presented this to the State Central Committee, because suddenly the language was at such a high level that no one could understand what was being said. But then that was delivered on October 7th, and that's when there was no more meetings called, and we missed the November 11th deadline to have these rules on the agenda of the fourth quarter State Central Committee meeting, which is why we then had to have the State Central Committee vote to suspend the rules to even talk about these.
So wait, so no meeting was called because there was time. There wasn't a reason. It wasn't like the end of sessions. It's just the chair of the Rules Committee didn't call a meeting in that time period.
Right.
Okay, just clarifying.
So the deadline was November 11th. We missed the deadline, and then we ended up at the State Central Committee meeting. And then, we get into the meeting, and the first thing that happens before it starts is that two people start passing out this 4-page document, which was a reprint of the feedback from the admin committee on the previous version of the rules. So that weren't even relevant to the rules that we were discussing that day. And it was printed on the same paper as other documents from the Democratic Party of Oregon. And so it was very confusing to people. They looked at them and said, well, this must be today's issue. And they're reading through them and they see all of these problems that were highlighted. And it's like, oh, well, these must be really, really bad. So that was going on. It had been pointed out to the chair by two different people that her name was at the bottom of the memo, which showed it at least implied bias. And if anyone knows what a chair is actually supposed to do, they're supposed to be unbiased. And so by issuing a memo from the admin committee, it pretty much eliminates any of them from running that portion of the meeting.
All right, let's clarify there, because I want to make sure James concurs on this, because we're not certain this is from the admin committee, right? It's on admin paper, but it was printed by Lane County Democratic Party, correct?
We don't know who printed it necessarily. It was printed on the same color paper that one of the other rules that we were going to consider was printed on. So it could have been printed at the same time on the same paper that the other thing that came out of the Rules Committee would have been printed on.
So has anybody claimed responsibility for printing it out? The DPO or the Lane County is like, is this going to be an anonymous printing? Did a terrorist group print this out?
Well, we know that James verified this, but it was someone from Lane County who was passing it out. And then there was a DPO staffer that was also passing it out. There were not many people sitting in that area because the meeting hadn't convened, but she handed it to me. So I know that happened. So this was handed out by a DPO staffer. So it's really hard to deny that this any association between the admin committee and what was going on that day.
Yeah, so keep in mind, I saw it handed out by a DPLC person. That's the Democratic Party of Lane County, who Chris Wigg is the chair of the Democratic Party of Lane County, and he's the chair of the Rules Committee. So there's a lot of conflicts in those acts.
And didn't Chris Wigg just win a re-election or election somewhere? And I heard he just last night, right? In Lane County?
There was the reorg yesterday. The Lane County did their reorganization yesterday.
Right.
He won re-election to chair because nobody was running against him.
Okay. Glad he's still in power. Yay.
So so then we debated it, and people raised issues about receiving all of this information late, which was pretty much beyond our control. And what ultimately happened was that it was referred back to the Rules Committee to enhance the language. And so now it's been kicked back, still alive, but kicked back to the Rules Committee. But ultimately, I mean, what is so disappointing about this is that we really didn't feel like we were getting supported by the Rules Chair or the Chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon or the Admin Committee, even though a majority on the Rules Committee was working on this stuff. So, where is democracy in all of this? It would be really great if we had leadership that supported its people.
Yeah, I might add that there was continuous effort to make the focus on the 4 unwritten policies that were submitted and trying to spend our Rules Committee meeting time to address those 4 policies rather than a policy that just stopped unwritten policies from being used and being able to address those. So it was a distraction to try and get us to focus on that and keep this from being introduced to the State Central Committee. That's just one of the things that someone who doesn't want something to pass would try to do. The tactic is to delay. You delay as long as you can. In this case, Chris Wigg was against this. He was able to delay it until our term ran up. The SCC delegates serve a 2-year term. That ended at this last meeting. So now it's going to have to be considered by a whole new body of SCC delegates than the ones who sent it back to committee to begin with a year and a half ago.
So this whole cycle could start again when they go, well, we're really not informed on this matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have leadership that wants reform, and that was not what the current chair was elected to do. And so we continue to live with these policies within the Democratic Party of Oregon, which some of us find to be an embarrassment. But we will continue the fight on.
I just want to urge the future SCC delegates to consider the tactics of the arguments that come before them. The Rules Committee, all of the committees actually do a lot of work behind the scenes. It's really difficult if you have even a Rules Committee member who hasn't attended those meetings to come in at the end and kind of blow up all the work that was done on those committees because they weren't there to hear the arguments on why specific language was chosen, why we went a certain route. You might liken it to building a car engine. At the end, the driver doesn't need to know how the engine functions, how it actually operates, or why each piston size was chosen for whatever reason. They just want to know if it's going to work. The Rules Committee is in charge with building this particular engine. It was sent back to the Rules Committee to do that. The Rules Committee sent forth recommendations, and then those were ignored by people who didn't understand it. And really, there's a lot of things in the bylaws that somebody just reading one section wouldn't understand it. There were people that were complaining because they didn't understand why it didn't further explain the process on what a policy needs to do. Well, that's in a different section. We're not going to relist every single section of the rules in the bylaws in different sections so that people don't have to refer to different sections. So when we make a change, and if it doesn't include particular language that's already taken care of in a different part of the bylaws, you can't just assume that it's not being addressed. So there's a challenge. That's the challenge that the Rules Committee has. That's the challenge of the delay tactics. We don't get the opportunity to talk to the members about the issues that may come up that may already be addressed, their concerns that they might think of right off the bat when they read it, and they may assume we didn't talk about that. So those delay tactics really hurt with us being able to make those explanations. So realize that happens and that these rules are not permanent. When we pass something, we can always go back and fix them. And we do that regularly.
Wow. Boom. Thank you.
Betsy, you had some comments? Betsy, were there some comments from the line?
Yeah. Charles wanted to know from James, how many vacant PCP positions are there in Lane County?
Oh, hundreds?
Hundreds?
Yeah. I mean, we have quite a bit. We've filled up Lane County. The biggest seat is Eugene. Eugene and Springfield has the most number of PCPs, and we have a lot of those precincts filled. But overall, Lane County still has hundreds of seats available.
Another question was Oslafave, Larry and James, how are you doing the same thing over and over again and going to get a different result? And I know that that's a little bit rhetorical, but I have another kind of related question. Why do you not just take the information directly to all the SCC delegates?
Lack of time.
Oh my! Can I answer, Betsy, please? That's what this show is for. I mean, we've been trying to reach them. We've been trying to reach Oregon. I created a media network to inform the electorate of Oregon, and you know how many people watch from Oregon? Maybe 15. Maybe today's different because we got the interest of some other people in the DPO. But the progressives of Oregon, the Democrats in Oregon, in my view, aren't interested in being informed by anybody other than the DPO chair. So, we've tried. We've tried. Yeah.
So, to the first part, maybe there will be different leadership next time that will be more supportive of the work of the standing committees. That would be a huge change. The other... what was my second thought? I forget my second thought. What was the second part of the question, Betsy?
Well, I think it's going to do what are you going to do? Mine was how not take it directly to the SCC members.
It's actually very difficult to track down who the state central committee members are. That when you run for an office and you're given access to the master list of state central committee members, you have to sign this agreement that you'll never use it for anything else. For some reason, the Democratic Party of Oregon, and this is one of the unwritten policies, consider things like the membership of the state central committee to be confidential information, when in fact it should be public information. And that's another area that we need to address, because this is America and we have freedom of speech. And so we have to be able to engage with our fellow delegates and talk about this stuff. So that is a change that we need to make.
And I would add lack of time. A lot of people are busy. We're all just volunteers here. People have their jobs, people run for office, people volunteer for office. We had an election come up, a lot of attention, a lot of efforts were spent with some races and campaigns there. And it's really difficult when there's a body that meets once every few months. It's really difficult to get in contact with all of those people individually to try and get this stuff in front of them if the chairs are obstructive. Now, the chair of the Rules Committee could certainly have gotten this information out. He could have taken the proposed standing rule and sent it beyond just the admin committee for other feedback. We could have addressed that feedback as a committee. But in this case, Chris Wigg has made it clear from the beginning that he was against both of those standing rules, 11 and 13, and he didn't do anything to help get those concerns addressed, to help get them passed. He didn't see a problem with how things are currently operated, and so he wasn't interested in helping get the problems fixed. Even if a majority of the Rules Committee feel differently.
Is there any other questions, Betsy? So the final slide on the State Central Committee was what happened in the Platform and Resolutions Committee. They brought up 3 resolutions and they all passed. This is something that I'm going to talk about in the next segment, which is sort of a review of the last 2 years. If you read through these, you wonder, wow, who are these targeted for? And is this a really good use of time? And what are we doing with these? If you remember, one of the criticisms of the 2016 election was that the Democrats didn't focus on issues that the vast majority of Democrats really cared about. And it doesn't mean that it's a zero-sum game. We can also talk about jobs and incomes and education and all the things that people care about. But when we go through the review, you can see the proportion of resolutions that we've spent time on and what the issues were. So that was the State Central Committee meeting, and that is how it is currently governing the Democratic Party of Oregon. You can see that there was no actual governing business. There was no decisions to be made. I was going to offer a resolution to ratify the creation of the Grassroots Leadership Institute, but because the topic had been made so toxic earlier in the day, I was not even going to bring it up, and we will figure out a way to address that if it's actually going to be an institute. and not just another fundraising gimmick.
So you probably won't ever talk about that, but I'm just going to say this as a hint to everybody. Brad Martin deserves an Emmy, apparently, and we'll leave it at that. Maybe a Oscar. I don't know. We'll leave it at that. Emotional appeal is a very strong tool within the DPO. Carry on.
So the next segment is the sort of a review of what the Democratic Party of Oregon has done and accomplished in the past 2 years. This represents over $2 million. The annual budget is around $1 million, and so the 2-year budget would be $2 million. So the first slide talks about the elections this year and the primaries. So in the Oregon House, there were 60 positions up for election, and there were 15 positions up in the Senate. In the House, 47 of the positions were unopposed. And there were 6, I can't read my slide. It looks like there was 6 or 8% where there were no Democratic candidates to run. So we basically just handed the position over to the Republicans. And only in 14% of the races was there an actual choice. So when you wonder why people don't vote in the primary elections and why voting is so low, it's because when they get their ballot, they look at it and there's really no choices. And this all stems back to the unwritten policies within the Democratic Party of Oregon, which discourages people from running against incumbents and leaves us with incumbents then that feel like they are not accountable to the voters because they don't have anyone to run against, and so there's no accountability. In the general election, on the next slide, it's a little bit better. So there were 39 seats where there was an actual opponent, so that there was a choice between the candidates. There were 16 races in the House where, again, there was no Democrat in the race. Or excuse me, there was no contest, and there were, again, the 5 races where there was no Democrat. In the Senate, there were much fewer elections, and so it's a little bit more focused. There were 4 races where there were no Republicans, and so those were just handed over to the Democrats. And then there were 13 races where there were opponents. What the Democratic Party of Oregon should be doing is supporting anyone who wants to run for office that's a Democrat. They shouldn't be in discouraging people from running for election, and they should be out helping recruit. So we should never see 5 seats that have no candidates. We don't write off parts of Oregon because we feel that there's just too many Republicans and it's not worth our time. What we learned from the 50-state strategy and from whatever efforts we've made in the 36-county strategy is that you have to start somewhere. You have to get out there and you have to build, and you might be losing races for a few years, but it eventually leads to successes like we had in the midterms this year at the federal level. The legislative disappointments, the Democrats failed to pass the national popular vote, and this was actually astonishing because we had 24 counties pass resolutions in favor of the national popular vote out of 36. And then the Democratic Party of Oregon itself passed a resolution in the support of NPV. I arranged the conference call between the newly elected chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon and the National Popular Vote Committee going over the issues so that she could go and use her connections within the legislature to help move this forward, and nothing ever happened. It made it through the House, which a lot of good bills do, but got stalled in the Senate. The other disappointment was that the ban on no-cause evictions failed to move forward. And this was a particular tragedy just because of what happens to people when they get kicked out of their homes in areas of the state where housing is not affordable and it's difficult to find a place to live. So hopefully that'll get addressed in the next session. Within the Rules Committee itself, we passed the gender identity reforms. We passed the 2018 Platform Convention rules, and that is what led to the very progressive platform that we ended up with this year. All of the things that had been built in the previous one, where items that the leadership was uncomfortable with were buried. We got rid of those things so that everything was brought out and considered, and that's how we ended up with a very progressive platform. And then we did some miscellaneous housekeeping items. So in 2 years of activity, that's what the Rules Committee was able to accomplish. What we did not pass was the initiative to open the primary in 2018. We tried to change the standing committee appointments process into elections so that the chairs of the standing committees feel accountable. I mean, if you read Robert's rules, they are allegedly accountable to the State Central Committee, but because they're appointed by the chair, you get this unnatural relationship and a bias so that they're not actually accountable to the State Central Committee. We tried to change that, but it failed. We tried to change the composition of the executive committee so that that could actually be a functioning board, but that failed. Again, the electronic meeting rules failed to pass, and so you have no protections, State Central Committee and other committees, when you get pulled into these meetings for at least the next 6 months. The undocumented process review, Rule 13 failed, and then the articles, even the bylaws Article 1 rewrite failed because they were presented in the wrong order at the State Central Committee meeting on Sunday. And so all of the gender equity language had to be integrated into the rewrite of the bylaws, and because they were done in the wrong order, that's now been sent back to committee. So not a lot of success for 2 years of work in the Rules Committee.
Can I add, there was one success that we had early on that you missed in there.
What did I miss?
When we fixed the rules that they changed at the end of the last one that got in all of the current DNC members.
Oh, that is a big one. Yes.
That was a really big one. Yeah. Do you want to explain that one?
Yeah. In 2016, there was a innocuous change proposed that was explained as having no effect. But what it did was change the effective date of when State Central Committee delegates took office. And what they did was they moved it to after the into the new year, so that it wasn't taking their term took effect immediately as had been in the past. And what this did was skew who got to vote for the Democratic National Committee members that December. And I believe that we would have ended up with a different set of Democratic National Committee members if the previous rule had been in place. So it ended up being an administrative nightmare to do that because it just completely screwed up and made it very difficult to track who voted in these different meetings. And so we were able to get that reverted back to the original language, and so now it's back to normal. So if you are elected to the State Central Committee, you are immediately an effective voting member. That'd be a good one to add. Thank you, James.
Yeah, that was a big win. I know we were really happy to get that out of the gate.
Betsy, any comments from the line? So the final report was on the Platform and Resolutions Committee. Again, they passed something on the order of 22 resolutions during the 2-year period. I looked through them, and 3 seem to have appeal to the general base. So there was a resolution to open up the primary election to non-affiliated voters. So the resolution passed. We just were not able to get the primary opened up itself. There was a resolution regarding comprehensive universal health care, which we know is becoming the top issue across the nation. And then there was a resolution demanding hands-off Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And then the next couple of slides are sort of a litany of all of the other things that they passed. And I'm not at all diminishing the importance of these. They just should have been balanced with more resolutions that showed all of the majority of the Democrats of the Democratic Party that we cared about their issues as well. There's nothing in here about jobs, housing. There are things like investigating regarding the impeachment of Donald Trump, the call for superdelegates to be dealt with and diminish their influence, sort of an insider game. Then there was a resolution regarding the use of weaponized drones. Just a lot of issues that are corner issues and not the core issues that we can go out and demonstrate to many Democrats that we care about their issues. So hopefully that'll be something.
Larry, I think I'd like to address that, because I don't think you're viewing this in the light that it should be viewed.
Sure, go ahead. Our
platform covers those basic issues that address everybody else: jobs, housing, healthcare. The resolutions are what the platform committee does in response to things that aren't necessarily spelled out in our platform, things that aren't directly addressed within our platform. So you're not going to see resolutions that are specifically related to our support of jobs when it's clearly spelled out in our platform what we're fighting for. So I wouldn't view these resolutions as not addressing certain needs because they didn't come up as a specific separate resolution. You've got to point to the platform as that to show our support. These resolutions are just mostly in response to current happenings of the day, and they show support from parts of our platform, but aren't necessarily directly addressed within the platform.
Yeah, that is true. But in terms of optics, we need to rethink how we do this.
I agree there.
I'd also like to throw in the reality that these resolutions mean nothing, mostly, other than optics, because we have a 10-year-old resolution definitively saying no fossil fuels from LNG, specifically mentioning Jordan Cove. Here we have a resolution to support Governor Brown's decision to join the United States Climate Alliance. We can't even get Kate to say that she's against LNG from Jordan Cove when it is a resolution that the Democratic Party passed 10 years ago. So what was all this effort for? Optics, right?
Yeah, you're right. There's no teeth with any of these. It's really, it's the platform committee and the state central committee's opportunity to get these issues out into the media. You know, it's the DPO chair's responsibility to make sure that resolutions we pass get spread within the mainstream media. And so that's really where the power comes in, even though it's not really much power.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
On trying to influence our elected officials in more ways than that.
Yes.
Which we tried to do. I think we had tried at some point, but we got distracted from it, trying to create some type of a legislative committee of the state central committee that will directly work with elected officials so that they can be more receptive to our platform and the resolutions that we pass.
And then it's it's a sideline, but you would think that every Democrat we elect would abide by the platform. It's kind of our standards, and yet they mostly ignore it. And here we're looking at other methods to try to get their attention for not the same things, but specific directions. And we have LAIs for that too. How many LAIs get actually accomplished, right? There's a lot of not listening from the people we elect, it seems.
Yeah, so part of that, I mean, we can't expect the platform to be adopted 100% by every person when not even everybody in the room building the platform agrees on everything in the platform. The platform is generated based on majority. There are some of us who agree with it 100%, but certainly our elected officials, they're tasked with representing not just the Democrats in their district. They have to represent the Republicans and the independents and the libertarians and all sorts of folks in their district. So I understand why our elected officials, even the Democratic ones, don't necessarily abide by our platform. But I think it's our job as the Democratic Party and delegates of the Democratic Party to get in front of our elected officials and explain to them why they should support our platform and why they should support each of those steps in our platform, each of those pieces. One of the things that I suggest locally and at the state level is create a video. You can call it a propaganda video. You can call it whatever you want. But you create a video that you have each of your local elected officials sit down and watch that shows why we support our platform. I think if we did that, we would end up seeing a different reaction in the legislature if they know why it's in the platform. Because if they just look in the platform, they're not going to know why we came to that. They may guess, they may have an idea why we support those issues, but they're not going to have the arguments in front of them that they're going to be able to pass on to others when they're making those when they're making arguments in support of the positions that we've taken. So I think that's something each county in particular should look at doing if you haven't already.
Well said. Thank you.
So areas for improvement, there's been just an absence of leadership from the top. Again, we were just not feeling supported by any of our efforts that we were trying to achieve. And there just seemed like a lot of things going on in the background. There's a lack of diversity in the State Central Committee. We've talked about diversity for years, and it doesn't seem to change. We're going through reorganizations now, and I'm not seeing a lot of improvements that we've had so far. We need a greater understanding of parliamentary procedure and membership rights so people don't end up being confused about what's going on, which is what we experienced over the weekend. And this is also in the Rules Committee itself. I mean, if you don't understand the basic rules by which you are operating, it's hard to move things forward. We need to increase the support for the counties. This was highlighted. It's been talked about. What I saw in Clatsop County is that we got a plastic sign for our meetings saying Clatsop County Democrats. Not seen a lot else coming from the DPO. We need to treat the State Central Committee as the governing body that it is. We spend enormous amounts of time passing resolutions and rules, but other than passing a budget, it's really hard to recollect another instance where we exercise governance other than the reorganization election itself. We need to use the Executive Committee between the State Central Committee meetings for interim business that's stated in the bylaws, and it's not happened in the last 2 years that I'm aware of. We need resolutions that show that Democrats care about the base, and finally, we need to develop a leadership pipeline so that when people leave office, we have a strong bench upon which to draw. So those are the things that we need to look forward as we elect new leadership next March. And the final slide on this, we did have some grassroots successes. So we had a very successful platform convention in 2018 where a very broad spectrum of Democrats from across the state joined together to craft a very progressive set of items. We were able to elect 2 progressive officers in the 2017 DPO reorg. We were able to stop the Democratic Party of Oregon from depriving members of their participating in the state central committees just because they showed up late. And we did this by laying out in part to the Credentials Committee where they were in violation of parliamentary rules, and they responded. So we didn't have to take out a 2x4 to get that done. Any comments from the line, Betsy, before we wrap up the segment?
I don't see any questions.
Well, thank you, James, for joining today. It was great to have you with us talking about this.
Yeah, glad to be here. I want to thank you guys for your efforts year round in getting this out there. I know we're not getting a lot of listeners, but it's there. It's there for them to review. They can look at it later, even if they can't make it when you're doing it live. And appreciate you guys getting this out there and organizing it too. Having that list of having that timeline available. That's good stuff.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, James.
Appreciate that.
Upcoming events. So we have the remaining county reorganization dates. We have Crook County coming up on the 10th, Josephine County on the 11th, Lynn County on January 3rd, Curry County on January 6th, Deschutes County on January 10th, the 400-pound gorilla of Multnomah County with its 20 delegates to the State Central Committee is coming up on January 13th. That is still a tentative date that they're working towards, but it was just decided, and hopefully they'll be able to get it done on the 13th. They have something on the order of 750 PCPs. I heard from Laurel yesterday. And so if everyone shows up, it's going to be quite an event. Benton County is on January 17th, and Jackson County is on January 24th. Then there's a whole host of dates that I could not identify reorganization dates for. They're not on either the DPO calendar, and they're not on any website that I could find. And so if you are a member of any of these other counties, being Baker, Gillum, Grant, Hood River, Jefferson, Klamath, actually Lake County did have theirs already. I should take that off. Malheur, Morrow, Sherman, Umatilla, Union, Wallowa, Wasco, or Wheeler. You'll have to contact your county to find out when their reorganization date. And I encourage you to attend. And if there's opportunities for you to participate, we need you to join in. The reorganization that have been completed already, in addition to Lake County, are Harney, Clackamas, Marion, Tillamook, Washington, Clatsop, Coos, Yamhill, Polk, Lincoln, Douglas, and Lane. And again, all of these counties send delegates to the State Central Committee, which is the governing body of the state. So it's important for us to elect good people to these positions. Upcoming events, again, January 13th is the tentative date for the Multnomah County reorganization. February 11th is the first day to file for local elections. So it's time to be searching for candidates to run for local office in 2019. March 16th and 17th is the weekend of the Democratic Party of Reorganization, where we'll be electing officers. March 21st is the last day to file. So for all of your school board members, port members, and other offices that will be elected in the May election for 2019, the last day to file is the 21st. And a critical date to remember is the immediately following date, which this year is March 25th, for the voters' pamphlet statements. If you don't get something in the voters' pamphlet, it's very, very difficult to be elected. April 30th is the voter registration deadline. May 1st is when the ballots will be mailed to voters, and then the local election for 2019 is May 21st. So check your local elections office for the positions that are coming up, and make sure that we get people elected office that represent the progressive 56% of Democrats in Oregon. How to get involved? So if you would like to get involved in our efforts going forward, go to advancementofdemocracy.org and join. If you would like training in Robert's Rules of Order, get involved in candidate selection, any of those activities for making our democracy more functioning, we would love to have you. Excuse me. The next slide shows merch that's available, and the link to this is on advancementofdemocracy.org. John has created this awesome line of shirts about for SCC delegates that state that the State Central Committee is the governing body, and that it is from the governing body that we delegate its authority. It's not the reverse. And these are really great articles of clothing. The hoodie is especially nice to have, and it would be great if all the State Central Committee delegates would show up with either a t-shirt or a hoodie at the next meeting. You can also get swag from Uphill Media if you'd like to have that. Anything else you'd like to add, Betsy or John?
No, it's a great show. Thank you, guys.
Ran a little bit over, but thank you everyone for hanging in with us, and we will close out with a song.
As always, and try not to blow your eardrums out. Sorry about that, everybody. I had a little peek there. If you can, the link to that timeline and other information is in the description of this YouTube video, and if you could share it out, I'd appreciate that very much. Anybody in the audience, thank you all for being here, and we're going to go out with an old standard in the revolution, which is just Bernie Sanders. It's an interview that he did on CNN early on, and somebody asked him, what's your religion? And I think it was Chris Cuomo. And he was trying to catch Bernie in something. It always is. But his response was so amazing. And we're going to listen to that. This is a friend of the program and former volunteer, Freeman. He's Freeman Michaels, and he put this together with music. But here's my thing. Like, we talked about the platform, just real quick before we get into this. We talked about the platform and how it's not binding, and, you know, Democrats, you know, James says he's put it correctly, and, you know, have to represent their constituents and not just hold to the platform. But I have an override on that. If our Democrats truly believe that climate change is real, and I would hope that every Dem believes that, or else they really shouldn't be a Dem. And if they believe the scientists that say we've got 12 years to get our shit together, and they really give a shit about their constituents, then that should be the driving message. And the plank that says we have green energy by 2030 in Oregon should be their driving message. And so I see a lot of conflicts there between DPO members and goals and the need for the human species to survive. So that's really the question it comes down to. Don't tell me you're gonna bow to your constituents' needs and not want to save the human species. That's kind of cognitive dissonance right there, right? So I really ask of all the Democrats, and then that includes, you know, everybody in power up there, wherever you are, try to hold on to your power. Do you not believe the scientists? Because if you don't believe the scientists, you might as well just go MAGA. Right? Because at some point, the people are going to make you do what we need to do to survive. That's history. See France? We're on our way to France. I don't want to go to France, but France is pissed, and they're not pissed about a gas tax. All right? So, Bernie, because what he says here is basically the truth. We're all in this together, and if we die, we die. What are you really fighting for, Dems? Is it power, or is it saving the species?
This is what I believe. Every great religion in the world, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, essentially comes down to do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. As a 22-year-old kid getting arrested in Chicago fighting segregation, I believed it in my whole life. That we are in this together, not words. The truth is, at some level, when you hurt, when your children hurt, I hurt. I hurt. And it's very easy to turn our backs on kids who are hungry or veterans who are sleeping out on the street. And we can develop a psyche, a psychology, which says, I don't have to worry about them. All I'm going to worry about myself. I need to make another $5 billion. Hey, this whole world is me. I need more and more. I don't care about anybody else. I believe that what human nature is about is that everybody in this room impacts everybody else in all kinds of ways that we can't even understand. It's beyond intellect. It's a spiritual, emotional thing. When we say that that child who is hungry is my child, when we do the right thing, when we try to treat people with respect and dignity, I think we are more human. That's my religion. That's what I believe in. And I think, you know, most people around the world, whatever their religion, their color, share that belief that we are in it together as human beings. If we destroy the planet because we don't deal with climate change, trust me, we are all in it together. That is what my spirituality is about.